Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Learning with Me English podcast, where we explore what it really means to live, love, and relate from a place of depth and authenticity. I'm Anna, and today we're diving into something that touches every human being, something that can bring us to tears of joy and tears of pain. I'm talking about friendship, soulmates, and the deep art of building meaningful relationships. You know, we live in a time where we're more digitally connected than ever before, yet many of us feel a quiet ache, a longing for deeper, more nourishing bonds. Whether you're in your 20s figuring out who your people are, or in midlife reassessing old ties, this conversation is for you. Because at the end of the day, relationships aren't just a part of life, they are the essence of life. And I'm so excited because with me today is someone I truly admire, John, a relationship coach and speaker who has spent years helping people navigate the emotional terrain of connection. John, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Anna. It's honestly a joy to be here. And I have to say, this is one of those topics that gets me every time. Because you're right, whether we're talking about friendships that have lasted decades or brief, soul-stirring connections that come and go like seasons, these relationships are not just side notes in our stories. They are the stories. They mark our turning points. They teach us who we are and who we're becoming. So I'm really looking forward to unpacking all of this today. Because it's not just about understanding other people better. It's about understanding ourselves in the mirror of connection.
That's so beautifully put. And I love what you just said about how relationships are mirrors. I think a lot of people imagine friendships or soulmates as being about comfort or companionship, but in truth, they often show us where we're still growing. They reveal our triggers, our patterns, our blind spots, and they also show us our beauty, our value, and our worth. So let's start at the beginning. Friendship. It's a word we throw around so easily. She's my friend. We've been friends since high school. But it's also something that's so personal and layered. For some people, friendship means unwavering loyalty. For others, it's about shared interests, or humor, or emotional support. John, when you think about friendship, not just professionally, but from your heart, what comes up for you?
That's such a rich question. I think for me, friendship is one of the most sacred experiences we can have as human beings. And yet, it's often underestimated, especially in a culture that tends to glorify romantic love as the pinnacle of connection. But when I think about friendship, I think of it as this mutual promise, a kind of unspoken agreement between two people to walk alongside each other, not only when life is joyful and light, but also when it's uncertain, messy, and heavy. And it's funny because we don't always choose our friends the way we choose romantic partners. Sometimes they just happen, through shared experiences, through resonance, through the unexpected. But the friends that stay, the ones who evolve with you, hold you accountable, and remind you who you are when you forget, those are the ones who leave imprints on your soul.
Yes. And what you're saying really resonates with me, especially the part about friendship being sacred. I think sometimes we assume friendship will be easy, or lighthearted, or drama-free. But some of the most meaningful friendships I've had have been incredibly deep, sometimes challenging, and incredibly healing. I remember when I was in my 20s, I had a very close friend named Clara. We were like sisters. We shared everything, laughed endlessly, and leaned on each other in countless ways. But then something shifted. I went through a devastating breakup, and I needed her support more than ever, and she pulled away. At first, I felt so betrayed. I couldn't understand why someone who had been such a constant in my life would disappear when I was most vulnerable. But over time, with a lot of reflection and therapy, I realized something. She wasn't trying to hurt me. She just didn't know how to hold emotional intensity. She wasn't equipped to be in the trenches. That experience taught me a really hard lesson. Not every friendship is built for every season. And that's not always a betrayal. Sometimes, it's just a misalignment of emotional capacity.
Wow, thank you for sharing that so honestly. That story touches something so many of us go through, the grief of relational change. And you're absolutely right. I think one of the most liberating truths about friendship is that some are seasonal. They meet us in a moment when we need connection, laughter, inspiration, but they don't always have the depth or durability to carry us through life's storms. And that's okay. I've come to see friendship as something dynamic, something that changes as we change. And just because a friendship ends or fades doesn't mean it failed. It might have done exactly what it needed to do in that chapter of your life.
Friendship is a philosophical and emotional practice.
I love what you just said. That friendship is dynamic. That idea has really shifted something in me over the years. I used to think that if a friendship changed, or if there was a rupture, it meant something had gone wrong. But now I'm beginning to see friendship as more of a living process. Not a fixed role someone plays in your life, but a shared experience that grows or sometimes dissolves depending on where both people are emotionally and spiritually. And when you look back through history and philosophy, friendship has always held this elevated place. I remember reading Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, and he talks about 3 kinds of friendships: those of utility, those of pleasure, and those of virtue. The first 2 are common and often fleeting, but friendships of virtue, those are rare. They're rooted in a shared commitment to the good. You don't just enjoy each other. You help each other become better human beings. And that's what I think we're really longing for, especially as we mature.
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. I'm so glad you mentioned Aristotle, because he was really ahead of his time in understanding that not all friendships are created equal, and it's still incredibly relevant today. Friendships of utility are like work colleagues. You help each other out, maybe bond over projects or mutual goals. Friendships of pleasure are those we have fun with: travel buddies, drinking partners, gaming friends, and that's all valid. But friendships of virtue, those are built on mutual respect, shared values, and an intention to grow together. These are the friends who can say, "Hey, I noticed something in how you responded. Are you okay?" Or, "I see you shrinking. Come back into your light." They don't flatter you. They call you forward. And you do the same for them. I think of these friendships almost like a spiritual practice. They're not just about comfort, but about co-elevation. We help each other rise.
That term, co-elevation, that gives me chills. It really does feel like that with the deepest friendships, doesn't it? It's not just that you're there for each other when things fall apart. It's that you see each other's highest potential and actively root for that to emerge. And I love what you said about not all friendships being equal. I think we carry this unspoken guilt sometimes, especially when we outgrow a connection. But if we're honest, we don't have infinite emotional bandwidth. Behavioral science even backs this up. There's this concept called Dunbar's number, which suggests we can only maintain about 150 stable social relationships at a time, and only 5 to 15 that are truly close. So when we try to keep every friendship going at the same intensity forever, it leads to burnout, disappointment, and this low-key sense of failure. But really, it's just human.
Exactly. We are biologically and emotionally wired for a finite number of deep connections. And that's not a flaw. It's a feature. It forces us to be intentional, to discern, to ask, who are the people who energize me, who listens deeply, who lets me be complex, even contradictory, without withdrawing love? And the science behind connection is amazing too. When we're with someone we feel safe with, our mirror neurons fire in sync. That's empathy at the neurological level. Our bodies start to regulate. Cortisol levels drop. Oxytocin rises. This isn't just about having someone to talk to. It's about co-regulation, emotional attunement, and even immune system benefits. True friendship doesn't just feel good. It literally helps us heal.
That's incredible. And I think that's what people often underestimate about friendship. It's not just nice to have, it's necessary for our mental and physical health. In fact, I read that loneliness is as detrimental to your health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Let that sink in. So in a way, cultivating meaningful friendship is not only emotionally fulfilling, it's a form of self-care and even collective care. When we show up for each other, we're doing more than bonding. We're building resilience together.
Absolutely. I sometimes tell clients, your friendships are part of your nervous system, and I mean that quite literally. When we have a friend who can sit with us in silence or offer a word of grounding when our anxiety spikes, that's not just emotional support, it's nervous system regulation in action. And I think the most powerful friendships are the ones where presence is more important than performance. You don't have to be entertaining, you don't have to impress, you just have to be real. And when two people can do that for each other, consistently, and without judgment, that's when friendship becomes a kind of quiet sanctuary in a noisy world.
A quiet sanctuary. I love that so much. Because the world is noisy, it's fast, demanding, and full of superficial interactions. But to have just one or two people who know how to sit with your silence, who understand your energy even when you can't find the words, that's everything. Sometimes I think that's what we're all really looking for. Not people who fill the air with words, but people who can hold space with tenderness. People who see us, not just as we are, but as we're becoming, and who remind us we're not alone on the journey.
Exactly. And maybe that's a good bridge into soulmates, because I think these soul-level friendships, these virtue-based, co-elevating relationships, often carry the energy we associate with that term. But before we jump there, can I share one more idea that's meant a lot to me?
Of course, please do.
It's from the philosopher Martin Buber. He talked about two modes of relating I-it and I-thou. In an I-it relationship, the other person is more like a function. They serve a purpose. You relate to them based on what they do for you. But in an I-thou relationship, you encounter them as a whole being. You meet soul to soul. You aren't trying to change them or use them. You're just with them. To me, real friendship is an I-thou space. It's rare, it's sacred, and it's something worth cultivating slowly and intentionally over time.
Yes, that gives me chills. Because I think so many of us have lived in I-it relationships without even realizing it, where the connection was conditional, transactional, or superficial. But the moment you've had even one I-thou friendship, you can never go back. You know what's possible. You've tasted something sacred. And the best part? You don't need hundreds of those. Even one or two in your lifetime can change everything.
Do soulmates exist? And the many forms they take?
Soulmates. That word alone carries so much weight, doesn't it? For some, it brings a sense of hope and wonder. For others, it feels like a myth that sets impossible expectations. I used to think of soulmates only in a romantic sense, like that one person who was fated to complete me, as if we were puzzle pieces designed for a perfect fit. But over time, my understanding of the word has softened. It's become less about cosmic destiny and more about deep soul recognition. To me now, a soulmate isn't necessarily the one. It's any person with whom your soul feels deeply seen, known, and expanded. Someone whose presence wakes something sacred inside you. It could be a lover, a friend, a teacher, even a stranger you meet once and never forget.
Yes, that shift is so important, because the traditional idea of soulmates can feel so narrow, like we're all wandering the earth looking for one elusive person to make us whole. But as you said, it's not always romantic. Sometimes the most powerful soulmate connections come from places we least expect. From pain, from coincidence, from crossing paths at just the right or wrong moment. I've come to believe that soulmates are less about finding the one, and more about recognizing the ones. plural. The souls who arrive to awaken, challenge, or nourish you. And they don't always stay. Some soulmates come to break you open, some come to help you heal, and some come to simply sit beside you through seasons of life when you need to remember who you are.
Exactly. That reminds me of the poet Rainer Maria Rilke. He said, "The purpose of life is to be defeated by greater and greater things." I think soulmates do that to us. They humble us. They undo us. They reflect our beauty and our brokenness back to us with such honesty that we can't help but grow. And you're right, some of them don't stay, and that can hurt, sometimes deeply. But not every soul connection is meant to last forever. Some are meant to be catalysts, like fire. They burn brightly, transform us, and then move on. And honoring that impermanence can actually deepen the meaning, not diminish it.
That's so true. I think we often confuse longevity with depth. But some of the most profound soul encounters are brief, like the traveler you meet on a train who says one thing that changes your life, or the person you love intensely for a season who then walks away, leaving you with nothing but a poem written in your chest. And from a psychological point of view, it actually makes sense. Carl Jung talked about the anima and animus, inner aspects of the soul we often project onto others. Sometimes we feel such intensity with someone because they reflect back our own potential, our shadow, our unlived life. They don't complete us, but they awaken us to parts of ourselves we had forgotten or never fully embraced.
Yes. And isn't that the paradox? That sometimes the people we feel most drawn to are those who disturb our equilibrium, who rattle the cage of who we thought we were. But instead of seeing that discomfort as a red flag, maybe it's an invitation to evolve. In that way, soulmates are not just comforting, they're confronting. They don't just love the person you are. They love, and sometimes demand, the person you're becoming.
And when you meet someone like that, there's often a sense of time bending. Have you felt that? Like, you just met this person, and yet it feels like you've known them forever. Or maybe they finish your sentences before you even speak. It's not about logic. It's about recognition. Your nervous system relaxes, your guard drops, and there's this unspoken knowing. You get me. You see something in me that I've been longing to have seen. And what's wild is neuroscience actually backs this up. There are studies showing that when people experience these deep synchronies, emotionally, linguistically, even neurologically, their brainwaves start to align. It's not just poetic, it's physiological.
That's incredible. And it makes sense, because those moments don't just feel meaningful emotionally. They feel cellular, like something ancient is remembering itself. I've had that experience before, where I met someone and thought, I've known you in other lifetimes. And whether or not you believe in past lives, that feeling is undeniable. It's soul-level memory. And you're right, it's not always easy. Sometimes it's intense. Sometimes it brings up old wounds. But even that can be a kind of grace, because you finally get to look at those places with someone who sees you beyond your defenses.
Yes, that's the magic of it. Soulmate connections don't ask you to perform. They invite you to shed, to be raw, unvarnished, and whole, even in your mess. They remind you that love isn't about perfection. It's about presence. That being fully seen is the most sacred intimacy of all. And here's the thing. I don't think we find soulmates. I think we recognize them. And to recognize someone like that, we have to be present in our own lives. Attuned, awake. If we're too distracted, too guarded, too caught in old stories, we might miss them.
So true. It's like tuning a radio. If your heart isn't on the right frequency, you won't hear the signal when it arrives. But when you are, when you've done enough healing to stay open, but still soft enough to be moved, that's when the soulmates appear. Sometimes quietly, sometimes like thunder. And when they do, we have a choice. We can close up, fear the intensity, and walk away. Or we can lean in, trust the pull, let the connection change us, even if it scares us. Because in the end, isn't that what we're here for? To touch and be touched. To be mirrors for each other's most sacred becoming?
Yes, 1,000 times yes. Soulmates, in all their forms, are reminders that we are not alone, that love, in its truest expression, is not possession, it's presence, it's freedom, it's resonance. And when we allow ourselves to love like that, whether for a season, a lifetime, or a single afternoon, we begin to understand what it means to live a meaningful life.
That was, wow. I feel like I just took a breath I didn't know I was holding. Thank you for this, John. For naming something that so many of us have felt, but never had the words for.
And thank you, Anna, for holding space for this kind of conversation. It's in these moments that we remember how powerful it is to speak from the heart.
You know, John, as we talk about soulmates and deep connection, I find myself circling back to one fundamental question. What actually makes a relationship meaningful? Not just pleasant, or convenient, or functional, but truly soul-nourishing. Because, let's be honest, we can have people in our lives for years and still feel lonely in their presence. Duration doesn't always equal depth. I think a meaningful relationship is one where you feel emotionally safe, first and foremost, where you can be real, even messy, and still feel held. It's a space where you're not performing or shrinking, where you're not afraid that if you show your fear, your vulnerability, your confusion, the other person will turn away. In fact, they lean in, they stay.
Exactly. Emotional safety is the foundation. And it's not just about kindness or warmth, it's about consistency. It's about someone showing up again and again, not just when it's easy, but when it's hard. When you're spiraling. When you're not your best self. It's in those moments that true connection is forged. I've been reading a lot lately about attachment theory, how our early experiences with caregivers shape our sense of safety in relationships. And it's fascinating how this shows up in adult bonds. We all carry attachment styles, secure, anxious, avoidant, and they color how we love, how we trust, how we respond to conflict. A meaningful relationship isn't necessarily one where no issues arise. It's one where both people are willing to understand and work with those patterns, instead of blaming or shaming each other for them.
Yes, I love that you brought that in. Because it's so easy to think, if this were the right person, it wouldn't be this hard. But in reality, meaningful relationships are not about no conflict. They're about how we navigate it, how we repair, how we say, I'm sorry I hurt you. I want to do better. Let's figure this out together. That's emotional maturity. And you mentioned consistency, which I think ties into something I call relational reliability, that feeling of, I can count on you. Not just for the big stuff, but for the daily little things, the check-ins, the remembering. The way they notice when your energy shifts and ask, hey, are you okay? And mean it.
Yes, and that noticing, that is love. It's presence in action. When someone remembers that your favorite tea calms you after a tough day, or they text you before a big meeting just to say, you've got this, it's not about grand gestures. It's about attunement, about showing, through consistent acts, that you matter. And there's another piece I think is essential, shared purpose. Not necessarily identical life goals, but a shared intention. A sense that your connection serves something beyond just comfort. Maybe it's growth, maybe it's healing, maybe it's creative collaboration or parenting or spiritual exploration. But when a relationship feels aimed, it deepens. It starts to feel like sacred ground.
So true, because love without direction can drift. But love with purpose becomes devotion. And I don't mean codependence or enmeshment. I mean two whole people walking side by side, committed not just to each other, but to something larger. A shared becoming. I once heard someone say, the most meaningful relationships are those where you both feel more yourself in each other's presence. And I've found that to be deeply true. When I'm with someone and I feel more grounded, more creative, more alive, not because they're doing something specific, but simply because of how they see and support me, that's meaning.
That's beautiful, and it reminds me of the concept of witnessing, the sacred act of being seen. When someone truly sees you, not just your achievements or your persona, but your essence, and still chooses to be with you, that is intimacy. It's healing. Because so many of us go through life unseen, misunderstood, or misjudged. Meaningful relationships don't require perfection. They require presence, curiosity, and perhaps most of all, the courage to keep learning each other over and over. Because people evolve. Needs change. What worked last year might not work today. And when both people are willing to update their understanding, rather than clinging to a static idea of each other, that's when the connection stays alive.
Yes. That dynamic quality, aliveness, is so underrated. So often we fall in love with someone's potential or a version of them that no longer exists. But meaningful love isn't about holding someone still. It's about holding space for their transformation and being willing to let the relationship itself evolve, sometimes through joy, sometimes through discomfort. And let's not forget the role of play in all this. We talk a lot about emotional depth, and that's vital, but joy is just as sacred. Playfulness, laughter, lightness, those are the soul's way of exhaling. The ability to be silly with someone, to have inside jokes, to dance around the kitchen like weirdos, that's intimacy too. It's what makes the heavy moments bearable.
Absolutely. We need both. The depth and the levity. The silence and the laughter. The rituals and the spontaneity. A truly meaningful relationship is one where you can cry in front of someone without shame, and then 5 minutes later laugh with them until your stomach hurts. That emotional range, that safety to be fully human, is what gives the relationship its soul. And when I think back on the most meaningful relationships in my life, they weren't necessarily the longest ones. They were the ones where I felt most alive, where I felt braver, wiser, more grounded simply by being in their presence. And sometimes that was for a few years, sometimes a few weeks, but the impact, they left fingerprints on my soul.
That's such a powerful image, fingerprints on the soul. Yes, meaning isn't measured in minutes, it's measured in transformation. In how someone changes you, teaches you, or simply reminds you of something you'd forgotten. Your worth, your power, your tenderness. So maybe that's the secret. Meaningful relationships are less about what we get from each other and more about what we awaken in each other.
Yes, and if we approach every connection with that lens, not as a transaction, but as a mirror, a catalyst, a place to grow, then even brief encounters can become sacred.
Which brings us full circle, doesn't it? Friendship, soulmates, and meaningful love. They're all different expressions of the same deep human longing to be seen, to be felt, and to be changed by connection.
The art of letting go when relationships change or end.
As much as we love to speak about connection, we also have to honor its other side, disconnection. Because sometimes, even the most meaningful relationships come to an end. Not always because of betrayal or harm. Sometimes it's just time. The energy has shifted. The season has changed. And learning to let go with grace and gratitude is a spiritual practice in itself. I think we all carry grief over connections that didn't last, especially those that touched us deeply. Friendships that once felt like forever. Loves that opened us and then faded. It can feel disorienting, almost like a part of you no longer knows where to rest. But what I've learned is that endings don't always mean failure. Sometimes they're just part of the natural rhythm of life, of growth.
That's such a tender truth, John, and one that's so often avoided. We're taught to cling, to hold on at all costs, especially when a connection has history or intensity. But in doing that, we sometimes prevent the relationship from completing its natural arc. I love how the Stoics approach this. They practice something called premeditatio malorum, which means visualizing the possibility of loss before it happens, not to dwell in fear, but to appreciate the present more deeply. They understood that impermanence gives beauty its texture, that nothing is promised, and so everything is precious. When we truly take that in, we stop needing to possess the people we love. We learn to hold them with open hands rather than clenched fists.
Exactly. Love without possession, connection without ownership. That's one of the highest forms of maturity, I think. I read recently about the Buddhist idea of non-attachment in love, not as indifference, but as the willingness to love fully while accepting that everything is subject to change. That doesn't mean detaching from care or affection, but rather from expectation, from the illusion that things must stay the same in order to be valuable. Some of the deepest peace I've found has come from saying, "This was beautiful, and now it's over, and I'm grateful." It's a bittersweet alchemy, because when we release someone with compassion, we also release ourselves.
And there's a quiet power in that, isn't there? In honoring what was without needing to vilify it, or rewrite the story to justify the ending. So many people drift into resentment simply because they don't know how to grieve the goodness without needing a villain. But letting go can be an act of deep love. Love for yourself, for who you're becoming, and love for the other person for their path, which may no longer align with yours. It's saying, "I loved you enough to let you go in peace," rather than force you to stay in a shape that no longer fits.
It reminds me of that Rilke quote, "Let everything happen to you, beauty and terror. Just keep going. No feeling is final." That includes the ache of loss, the sharpness of absence. These too are part of the human experience, and resisting them only deepens our suffering. I've come to believe that every relationship leaves behind a kind of soul imprint. Even when they end, they don't disappear. They shape us, teach us. Sometimes they awaken parts of us that we didn't know existed, and we carry those gifts forward, even if the person is no longer in our life.
Yes, I think that's the most gentle truth of all, that love doesn't have to last forever to be real. Some people come into our lives like wildflowers. They bloom quickly, vibrantly, and then they're gone. But oh, the color they leave behind. And part of the art of living well, I believe, is learning to say goodbye without bitterness, to bow to what was, to hold space for both grief and gratitude, and to trust that every ending creates the space for something new to begin. Maybe not immediately, but eventually, in time.
And maybe that's the quiet promise of connection, that even when it ends, it leads us back to ourselves, to our own hearts, wiser, softer, more open, more awake.
So, to everyone listening, if you're holding the weight of an ending or feeling the ache of distance, know that you're not alone. Letting go is not a failure. It's a passage, and it's okay to feel the sorrow, the confusion, the longing. Those emotions are part of love too. And eventually, in your own time, you will find yourself again. Perhaps changed, perhaps even stronger, but still capable of deep connection, still open to love.
And who knows, maybe in letting go, you're making room for the next soul connection, one that will meet you where you are now, one that fits who you're becoming.
Exactly, because love doesn't end, it evolves, it finds new forms, it teaches us how to trust life again.
the heart of connection.
So here we are, friends. At the end of this shared reflection, we've explored friendship, soulmates, meaningful bonds, and the courage to let go. And through it all, one thread has remained constant. The heart of connection is presence, the willingness to show up, to listen, to witness, to care.
Connection is the thread that stitches our lives together. It's how we make meaning, how we heal, how we remember that we're never truly alone. Whether you're in the midst of deep friendship, navigating love, healing from loss, or simply yearning for more connection, know that your desire is sacred, and your capacity to love is infinite.
Thank you for being here with us, for listening, for feeling, for reflecting. We hope this episode reminded you of something tender, something true, something already within you.
And until next time, keep your heart open, keep showing up, and remember, the most beautiful connections often begin with the simple act of presence. Take care, friends. We'll see you in the next episode.